Trey, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure. Okay, so I think where we left off, and we're going to try to zip through this stuff quickly. I think we left off, we were talking about character on pages 110 and 111. And we'd already discussed showing and telling and motivated and plausible. And I think, talked a little bit about absurdist literature and the anti-hero, someone who, essentially has no control over his or her life. Well, the next term on page 111, next couple of terms, dynamic, static, foil. I think I referred to foil, but I skipped dynamic and static. Dynamic character undergoes some kind of change. Minister's Black Veil, which I'd ask you to just read through and look at for today. Parson Hooper, a dynamic character or a static character? Dynamic undergoes some kind of change. Static remains the same all throughout. It kind of depends. And here's what it depends upon. Depends upon whether you consider the dynamic or static referring solely to from the exact moment the story opens to the end. Or the description or the discussion we kind of get of why people react the way they do to his character. That is, why he puts on the veil, right? Because it's suddenly, one Sunday morning, he puts on the veil. What is that telling us about every other Sunday morning prior to that? He never wore the veil. So it's dynamic in the sense that he changes that way. And it's kind of dynamic in terms of the people's responses to him because, they freak out and they stay freaked out for quite a while. So, dynamic character undergoes some kind of change because of the action of the plot. Static doesn't change at all. In Star Wars, I'm going to use all kinds of references to other things in popular culture. In Star Wars, is Obi-Wan the original Star Wars? Okay, 1977 and 1983. In the original Star Wars, is Obi-Wan dynamic or static? Does he really change much? I mean, he dies at the end. That being born and dying, those are just parts of life. You can't say that's dynamic, static. He's pretty much the same all throughout. Han Solo, you could say he changes a little bit, but not really. He's pretty static. Darth Vader, from the beginning to the end, again, the first three films, very dynamic. Not in the first one, not in the second one, but when you get that turn at the end of the third, that's what makes him a dynamic character, okay? Foil, talked about, helps bring out, reveal by contrast, distinctive qualities of another character. You don't only have foils for the main character, okay? Lots of characters have foils. Now, foil is a literary term. All of us have foils. We have people around us who bring out good and bad aspects of our characters, right? I mean, do you know somebody who you just don't really like being in the same room with that person because it just gets you riled up? Well, that's bringing out an aspect of your character. Similarly, there are people you just love to spend time with, and it makes you feel good. That's kind of a foil thing, all right? Stock characters. Flat characters, bottom of page 111. Flat character embodies one or two characteristics, qualities, ideas, traits, and, you can pretty much describe them. I use Star Wars an awful lot. It's not because I'm a Star Wars freak. I'm not by any means. But the characters are so good for talking about this. Yoda. Is Yoda rounded? Is he full? He's pretty flat. He pretty much does the same thing. I mean, he trusts and relies on the Force, and pretty much the Force will provide everything for him. Okay? He's flat in that sense. In the Die Hard series of films, John McClane, Bruce Willis's character, he's pretty flat. Why? You know he's ultimately going to do the right thing. Usually it involves a lot of violence, a lot of shooting, blah, blah, blah. Okay? It's flat. Okay? Some flat characters are recognizable as stock characters. Stock, like you walk into a bookstore when there's a brand new book being published, and sometimes they'll have a cardboard cutout of the author or the major character. Okay? That's a pretty good visual representation of a stock character. You might as well just put the image up because the person doesn't really do much. And I don't mean the person doesn't have any import or any bearing on the action of the story or novel or play or whatever. It's just that you automatically know what that person's going to be like. If you go back and watch Westerns of the 1930s, okay, pretty much the good guys were stock characters and the bad guys were stock characters. How could you almost immediately recognize a good guy if you've ever seen any 1930s Westerns? They wore white. That's it. And the bad guys wore black. Think of the Star Wars films because they're space westerns. That's what they've been referred to as by a lot of scholars and such. How does that get reversed in the first Star Wars film? For example, when we're taken aboard that Star Destroyer, how are the stormtroopers dressed? They're all in white. It takes that conventional symbolism that we're kind of used to and reverses it. But Darth Vader's all in black. Okay? The Emperor dresses in black. Obi-Wan's kind of dingy, dirty white, Luke is often, kind of that tan, that beige, and I think there's color symbolism going on there. In other words, there's good and bad in them. They're not meant to be cardboard cutouts, okay? Round characters, next page. More complex. So round characters doesn't mean they're fat. It just means they're not flat. Round characters are characters you can kind of believe in. Hamlet, we're going to see when we get to Hamlet, or Oedipus when we get to Oedipus. They're very round characters. Once we start reading those plays and you get it, you're kind of going like, yeah, I can believe this guy. I can see how somebody like this could be real. Okay? But there will be other characters you're like, no. Too one-dimensional. It's just a flat image. All right? So, let's see, that's 107 to 158. So, let's skip a bunch. Because all you have after that are a bunch of short stories that kind of give examples of various kinds of characterization. How authors, create characters. Okay, so, jump to setting, page 159. I'm going to say very little about setting. Context in which the action of a story occurs. What does context mean? One thing I'm going to do a lot in this class, and it's largely because I teach, or used to teach, haven't taught in a couple of years, a course called The History of the English Language. And we go back to like 5,000 years ago, to when the pre-origins of the English language were kicking around in what is modern day, Ukraine. And so one of the things we do in that class is we talk a lot about what's called etymology, the history of words, right? Context. It's Roman, or Latin. Con, from co, okay? and it means with or together. Text, we look at, you'll hear English literary people or English professors, they very seldom anymore refer to a poem as a poem. It's called a text. Or a novel as a novel. It's just another text. And by that it's meant just something to be read and interpreted. But we have another entire word in industry that's also related to that word, textile. Like clothing, fabric. So how in the world do you get books, novels, poems, plays, etc. related to fabric? Weaving, something woven. Woven with, that is, interspersed with, worked into. A textile is something that is woven, right? You've got threads going like this, and threads going like that. A text is also woven with words. There's a beautiful passage in the Old English poem Beowulf where it talks about a poet within the poem, in the spur of the moment, finding words and joining them and weaving them together to create a spur of the moment poem about the character of Beowulf. Okay? It's a wonderful example of what this means. So, the context in which the action of the story occurs. So what is being woven together? What is the context? What are the threads? Let's say this one. Place. Time. Culture. And you can, break off from culture and you can say the political culture, the religious culture, the ideological culture. In other words, use a French word, the social milieu or the cultural milieu in which the story takes place. Right? Minister's Black Veil takes place when? What page is it on? Where is it? There it is. Page 315. It begins with discussion of Hawthorne. Actually, not 331, because we get another story first. 1836 is the date that it was written, okay? So you have a subtitle, a parable. And a parable has a little circle, I don't remember what you call that little mark, next to it. And at the bottom of the page, it says, another clergyman in New England, Mr. Joseph Moody of York, Maine, who died about 80 years since, that is, 80 years ago, that is from the time of the writing or publication, so 1756, okay? Pre-Revolutionary America, colonial America, but post real Puritan. The Puritan period was really the 17th century, from the founding until about 1700 or so, okay? Made himself remarkable, blah, blah, blah. So, the time is the mid-18th century. Where is its location? It's in New England. Are we given an exact? Yes, we are given an exact place. It's Milford. I don't remember if it's Milford, New York, or Pennsylvania, or Connecticut. I don't think it gives a state. Right? Social milieu is kind of, okay, I'm being very careful about that, Puritan-y New England. Okay? Why is that important? What if that story were written in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, 2022? Could you have this story set in today in Murfreesboro? No, not at all. Because some guy wearing a veil to church it would be odd, okay? But people would say, different strokes for different folks, whatever he wants to do, kind of a thing. They didn't have that mentality in that period, all right? So setting can be really important. There's a play, right, genre, short story in here called Soldier's Home by, Hemingway. It's the very next thing. Hemingway fought in World War I. Okay, came back, and then went off and fought in the Spanish Civil War in the 30s and reported about it. Okay, but there's a character in Soldier's Home who's a young guy, teenager, from Oklahoma or Kansas, and he goes and fights off in France, and he lives and sees Paris, sees Berlin at the end of the war, has experiences, and then goes back home. So that, the setting shifts a little bit. We don't actually see him. If my memory serves, we don't actually see him in Europe, but we hear of his experiences. We see him in this small town in Middle America. Okay? Soldier's Home, the word home is talking about setting, but the setting expands and contracts. Because home refers to what? It refers to his literal domicile, the place he lives. It also refers to his small town. It also refers to that cultural kind of idea of home. And while he comes home, he's never really home. Why? Because he's some hayseed kid from Middle America who's gone off and fought in the war to end all wars. He saw things, did things no one, ideally, in a perfect world, should have to do. And he comes back, and home isn't home anymore. That's how setting can be so important, okay? So, settings can be used to evoke a mood or atmosphere, etc. Hopefully it does in, Minister's Black Veil. And it should also, more so in Barn Burning, I think, than Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find. But we're going to talk about part of the setting in Good Man is Hard to Find because O'Connor just is throwing all kinds of religious symbolism in it because of what happens within the course of the story. So then we get, Hemingway, Soldier's Home. We get F. Scott Fitzgerald. Yeah, we can go on to point of view, I think. Page 195. Point of view, real simple. Who tells the story? Okay. And how is it told? How many of you have read My Opinion? Okay. You can disagree. You probably will or do if you've read it. One of my professors that I had as an undergraduate would strongly disagree with this next statement. How many of you have read Herman Melville's Moby Dick? Yeah, it's kind of what I thought. I got a PhD in English literature. I've never finished this stupid thing. Why? You get about 400 pages into that god-awful novel. And he has this big, long cetology, I think it's cetology, section. Whales. This professor I had a thing for whales. Don't ask me why. I walk into her office. The wall was covered with whale images, cartoon stuff about whales, stuff about, Melville and such. I never quite got it. Or you've seen the film, Moby Dick. How's it? Anybody know how it begins? 3 words. Call me Ishmael. It's all told from the perspective of this guy named Ishmael. He's the last survivor of the hunt for the great white whale. And he survived merely because he got on a piece of wood after the whale destroyed the whaling vessel. Okay? So it's told from his perspective. How many of you have read the Harry Potter novels, or some of them, or watched a movie? Whose perspective are those told from? Harry Potter, and it's Harry. Does that mean it begins? I was born on July 31st, 1981, or 1980. And then my parents died a few months later, or a year and a half later. And I was raised by my evil, rotten aunt. No, it doesn't. But it's all kind of, it's implied, it's through Harry's eyes. So we walk along and experience things with Harry, so to speak. Okay? So that's point of view. Who's telling the story? How is it told? Well, Harry Potter is told from the point of view of a narrator, even though we're getting Harry's perspective. It's from the narrators looking into Harry's mind. That's why we're always told all kinds of stuff about what Harry is thinking. Okay? The narrator is... I should need to be careful about this. Your book goes on and talks about the different kinds of narrators. Third-person narrator, omniscient, limited, objective. We'll talk about those in a minute. Stream of consciousness, etc. There is a third-person narrator, okay, within the books, within the Harry Potter novels. Is that narrator omniscient? Meaning, does that narrator know everything and take us into, I'm going to assume all you guys are characters in a novel, and take us into what he's thinking. And then he's thinking, she's thinking. No, I don't think that we're always told what everybody thinks. We're told what a few characters really think. I mean, we're literally told Ron thought. That means the narrator is seeing inside Ron's mind. So, at the least, you have a limited omniscient narrator. Which is, a paradox, right? An oxymoron. How can you be omniscient and yet be limited? Well, omniscient, all-knowing, but not really. Okay? That's what that means. Or you can have an objective narrator. With an objective narrator, the narrator never tells us what someone thinks. How do we find out then what somebody thinks? Speak. Go back to the idea of characterization. Showing? Oh yeah, that's showing. It's a lot harder to write a novel from an objective narrator's perspective, because what does that mean? Your characters have got to say everything the author wants us to know. We can't assume ever what a character thinks. Okay? So that's what those terms are talking about. Editorial omniscience is when the narrator's voice makes a comment about the character of a person. This never happens, I don't think. Never happens in the Harry Potter novels. The evil Draco Malfoy planned. Meaning, evil applying to Draco Malfoy, not what he's planning. Narrator doesn't do that. Narrator, does in one instance, talking about Voldemort. But really nobody else. Okay? What else? What other kinds of techniques? You can have stream of consciousness. What's stream of consciousness? How many of you have written a paper that you didn't know what you wanted to say? What do you do first? Other than research and all that kind of stuff. After you've done, some research, what's the first thing you do? How do you begin that paper?
You just start writing.
And is it perfect right there? No. I've had a lot of students who thought it was, first draft, I'm a genius. Usually not. Okay? There are some writers that absolutely disgust me who are like that. I mean, professional English literary folks, Samuel Johnson, writer in the 18th century, was like this. John Milton. John Milton dictated this big, long poem about heaven and hell and justifying the ways of God to man to his daughter, and she wrote it down. Didn't revise it. Okay. J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, revised and revised and revised and revised and revised. Okay. Stream of consciousness, you don't really revise. I mean, yes, literarily, the author probably will, because he wants to, or she wants to, get across the idea that this is what a character is thinking. The greatest stream of consciousness novel is one called Ulysses, written by James Joyce in the early 20th century. I used to be what's called a textual editor. Part of my dissertation, and I worked for it a few years after I started here. And that means, looking at a text and trying to determine what did the author really intend, in terms of what the author wanted as the final version of this, because lots of times you've got multiple versions and variations, and sometimes those variations are required by publishers, other things. Well, Joyce's Ulysses is a nightmare for textual editors because he wouldn't stop revising it. And it exists in multiple forms over a period of like 10 or 20 years. And people have tried to preserve it or publish it showing all of these changes. It makes it impossible to read, right? Shakespeare, by the way, King Lear and Hamlet, two of his most famous plays, exist in different forms. So which one should we read? Should we read one with some of the longer speeches that are in Hamlet that aren't in another version, or scenes that are entirely skipped? We don't know what Shakespeare actually wanted because we don't have any of the plays written in Shakespeare's own handwriting. Okay? So, objective employ, bottom of 197, employs a narrator who does not see into the mind of any character, etc., as we've already talked about. Okay? Page 198-99. First person narrator, that is, a participant. The person who's telling the story is in the story. Okay? That's the example I used of Ishmael in Moby Dick. He's actually on the boat. So that when Ahab, goes crazy, he's watching this. He's this is going to affect me and such. So it can be a major character or it can be a minor character. And you can have these kinds of narrators in poetry also. The narrator of a poem is the persona. We don't refer to the narrator of a poem as a narrator. That's a term used for fiction. We use persona. So is the persona in the poem, or is the persona merely describing something he or she sees? In a short story that I did not assign, you can read it if you want. You may have had to read it maybe in high school. Bartleby the Scrivener by Melville. You have what's called an unreliable narrator. That is, the narrator, because he's a participant in the poem, doesn't necessarily always tell us the truth. Why do sometimes people not always tell us the truth? I mean, you could say they're evil. The character's not evil. Let's say, you're a politician and you get caught doing something you shouldn't do. Or you get caught saying something that's not true. Why might you then, at that point, not tell the truth about something? What are you trying to do?
Cover yourself.
Exactly. And that's what the narrator in Bartleby the Scrivener is trying to do. He's trying to put himself in the best light. Okay? Because he's not a very nice person. Okay? You can have a naive narrator like Huck Finn, that's mentioned there, or Holden Caulfield in Catcher in the Rye. Huck Finn doesn't understand an awful lot about the world. In one sense, you could say he doesn't understand how good of a person Jim is. So, let's go on. Symbolism. Page 220. Symbol is a person, object, or event that suggests more than its literal meaning. That's it, basically. Person, object, event. It can also be a color. Even though later on, he's going to use color in the section on imagery or images. Images can be symbolic. Why? Because images are things. So, page 221. You've got conventional symbols and literary symbols. Conventional symbols, examples. The cross, Star of David, a nation's flag. Okay. Why are they conventional? Because anyone that's used the cross and the Star of David, whatever one's religious beliefs, when you come across that symbol in a work of literature, you understand it's referring, if it's the Star of David, the six-pointed cross, it's religious. It's not just a six-pointed star, okay? And if it's a cross, it's not just, it's referring to Jesus, Christianity, crucifixion, all of that, okay? It's conventional, and by that it's meant it's commonly accepted and understood. That's what this thing refers to. People have been looking at that and understanding that for a long time. A literary symbol can include traditional, conventional, or public meanings of symbols. Okay? Or it's something that can just be established within the context of that work. Here's another conventional symbol, and I'll talk about a literary one in a moment. John Bunyan wrote a book called Pilgrim's Progress in the 17th century. Okay? Pilgrim's Progress. What's a pilgrim? It's a person going on some kind of religious journey. There is a destination. The destination is the place you're going to on the pilgrimage. Pilgrim's Progress. The word progress there means journey. It doesn't mean like, I'm getting better and better each day. Okay? Well, the pilgrim in Pilgrim's Progress's name is Christian. Who does Christian, therefore, not represent? What does it not stand for? Atheist. Buddhist, Muslim, Jew, pick your other religion or non-religion. It only stands for Christians, okay? So a literary symbol is a little bit different. It can take something like home. You've probably seen at one point in your life, something like a cross stitch, a poster that says, good luck, by the way.
Thank you.
What's the rest of the phrase? Home is where the heart is. So wherever your heart is, not the literal heart, obviously. Notice, heart there is symbolic. Okay. Wherever that heart is, that's where your home is. Okay? Say you're off on a journey, but you don't live there. Your heart is where? It's back where you came from. It's back where your loved ones are. Home, in that sense, is symbolic, and the heart is symbolic. Okay? Literary symbol, bottom of 221, notice, can be a setting, This is where I mentioned color earlier. It can be a character. It can be an action. It can be an object. It can be a name. It can be anything that one literally has its literal meaning, like home or house, and simultaneously suggests something else. Okay? Symbols aren't reduced to just a single meaning. If they are, notice, oxymoron, right? I just said they can't be, and then I said if they are. If they are reduced to a singular meaning, then you have what's on page 222, an allegory. Pilgrim's Progress is an allegory. It's called the greatest allegory in the English language. Why? Again, Christian only refers to Christians. Okay? A lot of people have said that C.S. Lewis's, I don't know if you've ever read Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe or not, doesn't matter, that C.S. Lewis's character of Aslan in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe is an allegory for Jesus. That is, you can, because he dies and is resurrected. That is, they suggest you can only understand Aslan as animal form of Jesus. It's not true. Why? Because Aslan is just Aslan. He's never referred to as Jesus, never suggested he's the son of the emperor over the sea. There are symbolic resonances of Jesus. Okay? So that's allegory. We're not reading any allegories. Let's go on. What is that? That's simple. Theme 247. Theme's pretty easy to discuss. Central idea or meaning of a story. Okay? Unifying point around which the plot, character, setting, point of view, symbols, everything else revolves. Now, your book begins with the little epigraph from Herman Melville. To produce a mighty book, you must choose a mighty theme. Is the mighty theme of Moby Dick killing the blasted whale? No, that's the plot. The theme is a whole lot deeper. Okay? So, what's the central idea or meaning of a story? What if an author tells you, my story in my intention has no central meaning or message? J.R.R. Tolkien, in the preface to the second edition of The Lord of the Rings, I teach it every semester, says, this story has, in the intention of the author, there is no hidden meaning or message. He says, all I set out to do was, one, write a really long story that would entertain or move or excite my readers. So what does he mean? There's no inner message. He's saying, I did not set out to write a story that says XYZ is the point. C.S. Lewis did not set out to write Christian allegory when he wrote Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. He wrote Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe because he'd been plagued for about 10 years with images that wouldn't stop popping into his mind. And one of those images was a great big giant tawny, kind of golden colored lion. And another one was a fawn, half man, half goat, carrying packages and an umbrella in the snow. And he's like, what are these things? And so he finally had to work it out. Does that mean, go back to Tolkien for a minute, does that mean there is no inner message or meaning? No, it does not. He says, I did not intend. Does that mean that we control the meaning of everything we say? No. And here's a perfect example. The other day in my other class, Should I go there? I said something, someone took offense, and from that person's perspective, I can understand that. It was not intended at all. Totally not intended. Okay? That is, I didn't walk into class going, I'm going to see if I can offend this person. And here is how I'm going to do it. Didn't do that at all. Okay? But what does that mean? We see things that the authors don't. Why? What I talked about the other day. We bring this stuff, we bring our entire backgrounds to every work. That's where the meaning resides. The meaning resides in two places. Between what the author puts down on paper and what we do with it. Does that mean every time each of us reads a book, let's say all of us read the same story, Minister's Black Veil. Does that mean my meaning, my interpretation is valid, and your interpretation is valid, and yours, and all the way around the room, we all have equally valid interpretations? No, it doesn't. Why? Because the interpretation has got to be closely linked and tied to the words on the page. Why else? Would you say, and I'm not demeaning or anything like this, would you say that your reading, pick anything, is probably more valid than a 10-year-old's reading of something? More valid meaning closer tied to what is there. I bet every one of you, even though you may not want to admit it, would say, yeah, probably. Why? Because you understand this better than a 10-year-old does. You understand the world better. You understand human nature better. Why do 10-year-olds have to be told, don't go off with strangers? Don't accept candy from a stranger. Because they don't naturally understand that. We, who've been around the block a few times, and I've been around the block an awful lot more than you guys, understand that. Similarly, when I approach something I've read a whole bunch of times, my approach to that, my understanding of that, is going to be at least a little bit deeper than yours will be. Why? I've peeled the onion back several times. If it's something like Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling and J.R.R. Tolkien, I've read those things so many times. I'll have my students in my Tuesday, Thursday class, I'll make some comment, and eyes will go. Not because I've shocked them, but because they'll go, for students who've read books, I've never thought of that before. I've never seen that before, kind of a thing. Okay? So, theme, central idea, meaning, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to have, I've not posted it yet. I don't remember if it's in this edition or not. Flannery O'Connor says in a letter that if you're reading a short story and you can separate the theme out, and you can say the theme is, then it's a poorly written story. She argues you need every word in the story to tell the story. That is, you want to know the theme of a story? Read the story. Okay, go on to, got 10 minutes almost. Theme, style, tone, and irony. Pages 272. Now, notice how this section begins. Style is a concept that everyone understands on some level. Now, he's just put into words what I probably poorly tried to express just a moment ago. Some level. The more uninitiated will have a surface level. The more deeply initiated will have a deeper understanding, okay? Because in its broadest sense, it refers to the particular way in which anything is made or done. I used to play soccer. I still like watching, soccer on TV and stuff. they're international soccer players, and some of whom were like, when I played soccer in high school and college, just very workmanlike. You can bust your butt and get the job done. And then there are players like Lionel Messi, who just makes it look like ballet. I mean, it's just disgusting with he's a little short guy, with what he can do with a ball and get through an entire defense by himself and still score. It's like, cut his legs off, it's just not fair, okay? That's style. There are certain writers who do things and you just kind of go, wow. I mean, I used to, when I'd have students write papers, I'd come in and I'd get everybody's papers and I'd mix them up so nobody knew who, and I'd read the titles. And there are some papers I just go, oh, that's a good title. And that's kind of like, ooh, this person's got style. And I've told them, I don't know how many students over the years, you ought to be a writer. You should don't go into chemistry. Be a writer. Just, right? It's everywhere around us, etc. Style refers to the distinctive manner in which a writer arranges words to achieve particular effects. That is, it's how if plot is the arrangement of incidents in a story, style, it's the arrangement of words in a sentence to achieve a desired effect. Okay? So, diction. It's merely the writer's choice of words. What did I say about diction in the syllabus? So, don't use any, racial, sexual slurs, etc. Don't use, the F word. That's all diction. Does that mean in and of themselves, each of those words is evil? Not necessarily. It means maybe there's an appropriate place for those. This isn't it. Okay? So you have different kinds of diction. Right? Which we'll talk about kind of when we'll get to poetry. Okay? Tone. Author's attitude towards the people, places, and events in a story. That is, without the author saying, I think the minister, Parson Hooper, is an idiot. It would be the author conveying, I don't really like this character. Now, that's not Melville. That's not Hawthorne's perspective. I'm just throwing that out. That is kind of Melville's tone towards Captain Ahab. Ahab is obsessed. I mean, really obsessed with the whale. Okay? So how do you reveal that tone? Again, through style, through diction, through the words that are chosen and how they are conveyed. Irony. We all know what irony is. We use it daily. I use it far too often. Why? Because sarcasm is a form of irony. It's a device that reveals a reality different from what appears to be true. Let's say you take your first exam, you get 20 points. And I put, well done. Really? You really think I think, good job. You're going to ace this course. No. And I have got papers before that I've, put in, and I kind of have to verbally come in class and just a blanket. I apologize if this offends you, but, and I'll, go on. So, verbal irony consists of a person saying one thing but meaning the other, like I just, did. Sarcasm, false praise. Situational irony, incongruity between what is expected to happen and what really happens within a story. So you're reading on along, and you expect, and then it doesn't happen. I can't give an example off the top of my head. Trying to think of a Star Wars. Dramatic irony creates a discrepancy, page 276, between what a character believes or says and what the reader understands to be true. Okay? I'm going to partially give something away. When Sophocles wrote the Oedipus plays, his audience already totally knew the story of Oedipus. Why? It was an ancient myth. They knew about this guy who did these things. I'm not going to tell you what they are because I don't want to reveal it if you've never read the plays. So they understood about Oedipus. And Oedipus is going to come out, the conflict's going to be introduced, and he's going to say, if I don't catch the murderer, let this curse fall on my house and on me. And the audience goes, whoo, boy, you just did it. Okay. I can't say anything else because I'll give it away. Combining the elements of fiction. Real quickly. We got 2 minutes. So we won't actually get to... Actually, we may not even talk about that at all. No, we won't. So, we'll stop. I can't say anything about the minister's black veil. So for Monday, minister's black veil, read the introduction, okay, and then the story. Trying to think if I should do this or not. Yeah, I'll put up a little quiz. I'll put up a little quiz today or tomorrow. It'll be on D2L. I'll send out an announcement when it's ready. You'll have, 2 or 3, maybe 4 days to do it. It'll only be like 10 points. Covered all the terms that we've discussed. So, there's a lot of terms, okay? But this one will just be extra credit. It'll only be worth 10 points. So, if you don't get any of them right, no points lost. If you get them all right, you got 10 points extra credit, okay? But it'll give you an example of what the quizzes kind of will look like. Probably the exact same questions, or at least things being quizzed over will show up on a couple of other quizzes as we do, because I'll do stuff over the terms also as we do quizzes over the next 3 writers. All right? It might go up today. Definitely look for an email or an announcement on the D2L homepage tomorrow, because it won't be hard for me to put it up. All right. Have a good weekend. Stop.